Good evening. Hello. Today I'd like to talk about how I view relationship dynamics, and I have compiled a spectrum essentially for how I view these relationship dynamics, mostly using the concept of different attachment styles. I do believe that most people have some sort of shadow that affects them when navigating relationships, while less people actually operate in a healthy or secure type of relationship dynamic. However, I have not conducted a survey, so who really knows? This is based off of my observations and experiences from the wild. I do think this is definitely on a spectrum, and people can have more mild unhealthy dynamics to more extreme. And I will be talking about that and everything in between. The inspiration for this video comes from me hating when people generalize anything, really, especially with dating and relationships. People are absolutely so varied, and the particular example that I was thinking of is there is this perception that Gen Z, which is my generation, are very avoidant and hopeless in romantic connections because they're always afraid of deeper feelings and commitment. And they must be swayed by this illusion of choice because there's so many people on the internet and there's dating apps and there's so many people, so they're like, well, I don't want to settle for anybody. It causes this feeling of like maybe there's always someone else better out there. And I do think that that is a valid perspective. I think some people are like that. I think it can be a little shallow, but I don't think that that's the whole picture of relationships. I think it's too big of a generalization, and I think realistically there is the opposite side of that spectrum where people will stay in toxic and unhealthy relationships way past their expiration date because they're afraid to leave. There is this push and pull between you shouldn't give up on a relationship so easily, but you also shouldn't settle for the wrong person. So here is my line graph that I have created. Notice that all of the letters are lowercase in order to protest capitalism. On the left side, I have the completely avoidant person, and on the right, we have people who I will call stubborn. These are the major two opposing sides to this spectrum. To the right of the completely avoidant, we have the slightly less avoidant. To the right of the completely avoidant, we have the slightly less avoidant. In the middle center point is the secure, and then anxious attached, codependent, and stubborn. Disorganized attachment is hovering over the center with both lines pointing to both sides of the spectrum, because this attachment style tends to exhibit both avoidant and anxious attached behaviors at different times. This spectrum can be applied to all types of relationships, including romantic, familial, and platonic. What's interesting is when I was designing this chart, I ended up putting secure closest to the bottom, and I totally didn't even do that on purpose. But it actually makes sense for it to be there because when you are truly grounded in a relationship, then that does represent more clarity, because when you're operating from these other attachment styles, there is an element of illusion and fear that you are succumbed to, and in a way you're not as grounded in reality. So first off, on the left, we have the completely avoidant person. This person is very emotionally unavailable and completely closed off to romantic or deep emotional connection. This is often because they are suppressing something, or maybe they just aren't really interested in emotional connections at the moment. This can be the type of person that is just solely after sex, if they're dating at all, which is fine to be in that space, but some people will deceive others and make it seem like they're open to a deeper connection, but they're really not. They will have sex with you and then ghost you. This is avoiding emotions and being avoidant in general with people, where they're not going to communicate to you that they're not actually interested. They will just move on or block you, which can cause some hurt feelings to the other person, especially if they had indicated that they were interested in something deeper at some point. I felt the need to include two different versions of the avoidant type of person, because sometimes people ghost you because they lack courtesy, but sometimes it's because of deeper emotional issues. This leads me to my next point: slightly less avoidant. These people are technically kind of interested in deeper emotional connections, and they try, but then they start to get close to someone, the intimacy becomes deeper, and it gets too much for them, and they disconnect, they run away, ghost, or block the other person. This person may not have had ill intentions, but can struggle with communicating their feelings or even understanding their feelings or why they're feeling triggered. So they will disconnect back into safety. They may not even be aware of this particular unhealthy pattern that they are engaging with. And they might even write it off or make up some sort of superficial reason for why it won't work with this person, when really the deeper inner feelings were triggered. Sometimes this person just feels like they're better off alone and that they value independence better. Sometimes avoidant people can have abandonment issues, and so they will abandon a connection or a person before they can get abandoned themselves. This could also be unresolved issues from a past romantic relationship where the person was betrayed or abandoned. This type of dynamic can manifest as intimacy issues, as this person associates getting close with someone with pain and betrayal. So when they start feeling that trigger, they're going to pull away. In childhood, their parents may have been neglectful, distant, or emotionally unavailable. Because of this, they will typically feel uncomfortable expressing how they feel or even sometimes understanding how they feel. This could also be paired with a fear of rejection, as the child may have tried to communicate and express their feelings when they were younger, and they were met with a lack of support or even anger. I feel like this was more common back in the day when children were seen and not heard. I think that started to die down in the 50s and 60s, so that's why the boomers are like that. Their feelings were heavily rejected, and they encouraged suppression of those feelings. Avoiding people can often indicate there was a lot of neglect in childhood, where they didn't receive reassurance and didn't receive healthy connection, and they just dealt with a lot of distance and avoidance. So that's how they know how to navigate relationships. These patterns are often passed down in generations until awareness is brought to them, and that pattern is transmuted. Now, oftentimes people who are avoidant like this often attract people who are anxious attached because they are mirroring each other's shadows. So when the avoidant person pulls away, the anxious attached person is going to chase after them because now it's triggering their fear of abandonment and rejection. Both anxious attached people and avoidant people have a fear of rejection, but they go about it in different ways. So why are they attracted to each other if they're so different? That's because they are recreating their childhood wounds with each other. They are subconsciously trying to rectify and bring attention to these issues so that they can heal them. But a lot of people don't realize what's going on with these patterns and they just keep repeating them. But your subconscious is going to keep attracting what you need to heal. So if you're avoidant, you're probably going to keep attracting people that are anxious attached so that you can learn to navigate those feelings and connect with them instead of just running away from them. If there is a secure person talking to someone who is avoidant, and the avoidant person starts to distance themselves, the secure person will probably try to connect with them once or twice and check in, but if they're not getting the same give and take or response, then the secure person will probably realize it's not being reciprocated and they will move on. But sometimes a person considers themselves secure and then they become anxiously attached when someone avoidant pulls away. And they can fall into that pattern if they haven't dealt with this, if they haven't experienced this type of pattern before. And I think this can really highlight how we have these unconscious shadows that are just lingering, and we can think that we're secure and healed until someone comes along and triggers that hidden shadow. And maybe you were secure and dating someone in a secure way, but then different people have different energies and shadows that will come and trigger these wounds out of us. And you might think you're healed, but maybe you're just not being triggered. Sometimes I think the avoidant person does get crushed by the fact that they are not being chased by the other person anymore and that they have pushed this person away. But sometimes I feel like they don't care if they're really good at avoiding their feelings and they're just constantly just suppressing them. I think avoidant people deep down do want a connection, a fulfilling, deeper connection, but they are too scared. So when someone pulls away that they really did like, I think they can go through a lot of grief about it. You can still experience avoidance within a relationship with someone when they are avoiding certain conversations or they avoid their own feelings, and it can create blockages to opening up about certain things. Avoidance also coincides with substance abuse in order to suppress those feelings that they're trying to avoid and to avoid other problems in the relationship. Now we have the secure attachment style. Secure people typically had a healthier childhood where parents were responsive to their needs. They brought comfort, love, and security. Secure people are able to talk about their feelings and the other person's able to listen, and they're able to work through disagreements without violence, excessive conflict, or disrespect. They are typically comfortable with intimacy, but also distance. If a person has to go out of town for a business trip, they're not going to lose their mind about whether or not they're going to be faithful. In a secure relationship, neither person is afraid that the other person is going to abandon them. And if that feeling did come up, then they would be able to talk about it and work through where that feeling's coming from. They're generally not scared that the other person's going to cheat on them or betray them in some way, because they have that deep bond and understanding that they want to be with each other and that they genuinely do like each other. Relationships like this are able to openly talk about things and not harbor resentment. That resentment is what creates bigger issues over time. There is trust, high self-esteem, and the ability to set boundaries and respect boundaries of the other person. There isn't fear surrounding expressing how you really feel about something. The anxious attachment style typically is anxiously attached because they fear abandonment. They often need a lot of reassurance, and when they don't get it or they don't get consistent communication, they start to get really worried that the other person doesn't like them anymore or that they're going to get abandoned, and so they latch on. Sometimes this will manifest as the other person blowing up their phone and being very clingy, but sometimes the anxious attached person just kind of internalizes their struggles and they don't share it with the other person, and they just kind of spiral by themselves. Now, once again, if the person that they're talking to is secure and they start acting anxiously attached, blowing up their phone, the secure person will probably recognize that this person is a little bit too insecure for them because they're not handling things well in regards to communication. These are the type of people who will double and triple text you when you're not responding for a long period of time just to try and get your attention because they're worried and they want your reassurance. Now, a secure person will recognize the imbalance, and in situations like that, you can offer reassurance. Nothing's wrong with reassurance. But then that person gets dependent on that reassurance. And if something's going on and they can't get it, they're busy, then they freak out because the security is not coming from within. It's becoming dependent on your attention that you're giving them. This dynamic can get exhausting, and it can cause the other person to need to distance themselves because it's not an equal give and take. They're like constantly pulling on your energy. This is why anxious attached people typically are subconsciously attracted to these avoidant people because it feeds their shadows. These people may try to jump through hoops to get the avoidant person to stay with them. They can often overcompensate in a relationship to try and prevent them from leaving. They often put others' needs above their own and can be people pleasers. It is this false idea that maybe if I'm perfect enough, they won't leave me. But this is often an unequal give and take, and it is authentic as it's not coming from a place of love, it's coming from a place of fear. Anxious attached adults as children may have had parents that didn't love them 100% of the time, only sometimes. Especially if they did something wrong, they would pull back all of their love, and they may have been abusive as well. Abandonment issues can also manifest if one or both of the parents were either physically or emotionally distant or not present during their childhood. And now, as a grown adult, this person will latch onto people in hopes that they will not abandon them as well. This creates a dynamic where they try to be perfect. And if they make a mistake or show weakness, they fear they will be abandoned and the love will be revoked. They will keep pouring into a relationship even if they're not getting the same love back. They can also struggle sometimes with solitude and depend on their partner for emotional validation. Next, we have the disorganized attachment style, which is a combination of avoidant and anxious attachment styles. These people typically endured a very traumatic and confusing childhood with the relationship to their caregivers. The caregivers often operating in contradictions, supplying a sense of comfort and then creating fear. They desire closeness but are also deeply afraid of it. They associate relationships with betrayal and anxiety, oftentimes not feeling completely safe. They tend to struggle with emotional regulation, low self-esteem, and fear of abandonment. If disorganized attachment people do not realize that they have this pattern, they may project a lot of their pain onto the other person and blame them for how they were feeling inside. Affection that is desired today might be rejected tomorrow. I remember seeing a video that said if you had an emotionally volatile mother and an emotionally absent father, then that can also create a disorganized attachment style. And I'm assuming the same is for the reverse. If you had an emotionally distant mother and a emotionally volatile father. With disorganized attachment, their responses can depend on the person that they are interacting with. If they're interacting with someone who is avoidant, they might be triggered to anxiously attach to that person. But if they're talking to someone who is anxiously attached, then they might be pushed away and pushed into more of an avoidant state. Next, we have codependency, which is an unhealthy dynamic where one person is dependent on another person for emotional or physical needs being met. This involves one person being more of a caregiver in some way, where they are prioritizing the other person's needs above their own, people-pleasing, and struggles to put up and maintain boundaries. The other person in this dynamic is reliant on this other person for having their needs met. As a result of this dynamic, people tend to lose themselves in these connections, and their self-worth becomes tied with it. If the other person is upset with them, then it becomes the number one priority to try and fix it and make the other person happy again. Otherwise, their self-esteem is going to be very low. Situations like this are almost always toxic. They end up becoming essentially one person. There is some overlap here with the anxious attachment style and codependency, but they're not completely the same. Anxious attached is the attachment style involved in codependency, but codependency is a behavioral pattern, not an attachment style. Anxious attached can lead to codependency. Both are ruled by fear of abandonment and rejection. Codependency on one side is being dependent on others, but the other side of it is needing to be needed by that person. And when either of those people don't feel that way, the connection is unstable. I would argue it's already unstable, but especially when they're experiencing conflict. These people typically don't like to be apart and can struggle with autonomy. And this becomes a problem because in a relationship, it's very important to maintain your own independence as a person. That's how you lose yourself in the relationship, and then you just kind of start living for the other person. You'll stop doing the things that you liked and the things that light you up just to be in a relationship with that person. And then you wake up one day and you look back and you realize you have lost yourself in this connection. Not engaging in codependent behaviors mean that you're honoring the space between yourself and other people. Now let's talk about the stubborn people. I place them at the end of the spectrum because this is typically people who have been together a longer time or people that are married and they have become complacent in their relationship. And they are just staying together because they think it's easier than breaking up. They have issues with each other that just never get resolved. There's resentment, a lack of intimacy, they fight, or there's even toxicity or abuse. They may not even like each other anymore, but they stay together because they're comfortable where they're at. I think most of these people do not want to face the difficulty of being alone or starting over. I put this at the end of the spectrum because I view this as completely giving up what you truly desire in a connection, and that sounds very sad. I literally think of it as like a graveyard, like you're literally choosing that fate. It is accepting your lack of alignment and resistance to growth and change. Sometimes these people are still together because they are codependent in some way. There is also sometimes the factor where one or both of the people feel that they do not deserve someone better due to low self-esteem and insecurity issues. They settle for someone that's disrespectful and abusive because they think they can't get anyone better. Some people stay together because they don't want to feel like they failed in a relationship, or wasted time, or chose the wrong person. So they stay in the situation just to preserve their ego. They've invested so much time into the connection, and they think that if it doesn't end up in marriage, or they don't stay together for the rest of their lives, that it was somehow a waste of time and a failure. And so they want to hang on to it. But that really is such a faulty belief, because just because a relationship does not go forever doesn't mean it was a waste. You still had good memories at some point, you learned lessons, and maybe had nice children, lovely children through it. I think it's more realistic to view relationships as things that come and go, especially because people are always changing. I mean, in general, I think most people evolve in some way. And if it doesn't work out, then that's okay. You can accept that there's no longer this alignment, and it's okay to move on. It's okay to end a relationship and a marriage that you're not happy in. I think this dynamic can also include a lot of substance abuse, as one or both people are trying to ignore this hidden issue. You know, carrying around all of these subconscious blockages and resentments, it weighs you down and it affects you. Some people stay in these connections because they are afraid of how other people might perceive them. In some cultures and religions, divorce is very frowned upon, and there might be major backlash from friends, family, or the community. This is an issue because in life it's definitely more important to stand in your truth, even if it means people will be against you. Obviously, it's not always terribly easy, but for the most part, it's better to choose your truth. This is authenticity, and if you never embody it, then you will never feel truly fulfilled. Some people do stay with a partner because they really can't afford a divorce or to live separate lives. Some people don't want to go through it because they have built this life together, and it can be very painful to tear it all apart and divide up belongings, and so they just stay with it. And that is the downside of marriage to me, is that people change and they can get crazy or abusive, and then it's much harder to just walk away. Marriage is not necessarily about love, it's a contract. It's nice when there is love, but at the end of the day, love and marriage are not the same. Some people use marriage as a way to get people stuck with them. I'm not saying don't get married or that I'll never get married, but it's looking rough for a lot of people. I feel like marriages are often just like really intense, painful lessons. And I mean, you could argue that about life and relationships in general. There is security in marriage, but that security can turn into a place that you are imprisoned in. Now, if it's great and healthy and you don't feel that way, then that's great. I'm not talking to you. Some people stay together for the kids. And of course, if that can be done in a peaceful way, then great. But a lot of times the children end up way traumatized by the parents' excessive conflict. There's definitely a group of people out there who think, like, I wish my parents got a divorce because they were crazy. And I mean, that really is, part of being a parent, is deciding, like, what is the least traumatic path for the children. So my take here is, if you're not happy in a relationship or a marriage, obviously try to work it out, but don't be afraid to blow it up, let it go, and move on. Easier said than done. So both extremes here on the spectrum are ruled by fear. All the way on the left, we have the avoidant, fear of intimacy or betrayal. And on the right, we have this extreme complacency of giving up. You are not living authentically, and you're afraid of being alone. You are letting your fears control you. Unless you heal the part of yourself that's operating from the shadow, you're going to keep experiencing issues like this in your relationships. All of these behaviors on the chart are self-sabotage. A lot of people aren't aware that they're doing this. A lot of people think that this is just how relationships are supposed to be. Kind of like how it has been normalized that you should hate your spouse at some point. The old married couple that hates each other. That really shouldn't be normalized. So back to Gen Z being too avoidant. I think there is some people like that. But I think the other side of that conversation is I think people just aren't settling as much as they used to. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. There are people who are quick to break up with someone or stop talking to someone because they're avoidant. But then there are people who do that because they know what they want and they know what they don't want. It is a spectrum, and people will do things because they have healthy boundaries. And people will do things because they have unhealthy intimacy issues. It goes the other way as well. There are some people who will not break up with someone no matter what even if it's toxic and unhealthy, because they're afraid to be alone or whatever reason. And then there are people who don't want to break up because they're really committed to working it out with a particular person, not because of unhealthy attachment reasons, but because they are determined. And they have that type of personality where they don't want to give up on something. In both directions, we have a healthy response to dating and relationships, but we also have those extremes. Which is why I don't think it's good to generalize these things. This is just one framework that I use to look up relationships, but I'm sure there's more that could be added to this little flow thing. So that is all I have to say for this video. However, I will be making another video expanding on this topic. I want to talk more about toxic relationships and mental health issues and how it comes into play with these relationship dynamics. So that will be my next video. Thank you all for watching. My name is Lily. Stay frosty. Bye bye.